All right, good morning, everyone. Officially, welcome to Monday. Lucky Monday. How's the weekend?
It was all rain.
It was a lot of rain, wasn't it? Wow. It's like being in the shower outside, just constant rain, hey?
But the weather, the smell is good.
It does smell good, right? It smells fresh, it smells alive. That's one of the things I like about the first time I came to Vancouver in the winter was in, I forget if it was December or February. Maybe it was December. And that was one of the things I loved, is that it smelled so alive, right? Like even in December it still smells green and fresh. And where I'm from in Edmonton, everything is dead and covered in snow, and so nothing smells like anything because it's
The
all
smell is because a mix of dry soil
yeah.
and leaves, and the leaves that where they fall, it is beautiful.
Yeah. Yeah, it's nice, eh?
Because there are lots of all raining here,
Yeah.
the population is very low. Is it because you feel fresh when you breathe the air?
Oh, maybe. I feel pretty fresh. I like the air. It'd be nice if the rain let up just a little bit, but still nice. Okie dokie. Let's jump into our stuff here. So on Thursday, just to kind of catch us up here, remember, of course, we were talking about BC First Nations people, and of course they're First Nations because they're the first people to arrive, right? So we talked about how the ancestors of all First Nations people in North and South America first arrived after the glaciers kind of melted. People walked across from Asia and into North America here. We said that the first people to show up in North America were probably simple foragers, right? And so we've talked about what makes a simple forager. But in some places of North and South America, people were able to develop a more complicated subsistence strategy and were able to live in larger groups that moved around less, right? Those are complex foragers. And for Indigenous people here on the West Coast, it was the salmon that allows them to do that, right? The harvesting of large numbers of salmon that swim up the rivers in the fall, catching as many of those fish as they could and storing them away, drying them out and storing them away. That's what kind of allowed people to live in larger numbers, to move around less often, to have stuff, right? We were at the museum and we saw lots and lots of stuff that these people had. And so what we'll do today is, I guess I should have started out with this, but what we'll do today is we'll just review a little bit of what we talked about on Thursday. We'll talk a little bit about myths and shamans. And then I have a little story to share with you, an Indigenous creation story, if you will. But we'll get to that. So again, the storing of salmon, the harvesting of large amounts of salmon and storing it away allowed all these other things to kind of develop and take place, right? So more complicated rituals, more complicated structures to live in, more complicated technology, more complicated social hierarchies, right? All of these things developed as a result of that change in subsistence, right? Change in sort of hunting or fishing strategy. Yeah, so here's some of these much more complicated houses, and we saw some of the pillars of those houses. Remember when we walked into the museum and they had those big, some of those were posts that held up a house, right? And none of these are really carved, right? They're just posts, but some of the ones we saw at the museum were really beautifully carved, right?
There was one on the other, on that
Maybe in the other room there might have been some of those too. I'm not sure. I didn't see all of them, but yeah, some of them might have been posts. I was thinking when we came in and you go down the ramp.
Because there were huge woods on that side.
Yeah, on those orange.
Yeah, and they were staying horizontally because they were very tall.
Mm. Well, those would have been, well, yeah, the ones that were on those orange kind of shelving units are supposed to be in there's a big hall, right? But they're doing construction on it for earthquake prevention. And so they moved all that stuff out to the side so they can do the construction, and then they'll move it all back in. So yeah, some of it was standing up, some of it was lying down. But yeah, really big wooden structures, right? Whether it's totem poles or whether it's housing posts. Yeah, and again, a finished one might have looked something like this, right? Quite beautiful and quite well made, right? Yeah, and so a winter village might have looked something like this, right? With maybe 10 or a dozen of these houses, multiple families living in each one, a bunch of totem poles and canoes kind of pulled up on the beach, and large groups of people living there for the winter, right? We said in terms of diet that these people ate lots of different types of food, and that this area of the world is very rich in terms of the foods that are available, right? So, of course, the salmon is very important, as are other types of seafood, right? Other types of fish, but also shellfish like lobsters and crabs and clams and mussels, all those kinds of things. Other fish that swim in the ocean, fish that swim in the rivers and the lakes, all of those are important and useful. Animals, we have sea mammals like seals and sea lions and whales, but also we have mammals on the land, rabbits and deer and things like that. And again, all of these are potential food sources, right? So indigenous people would have hunted or collected these type of foods at different times of the year, depending on what was kind of available and easy. And so, yeah, there was lots of different things on the menu, right? Lots of different things on the menu for these people. And similarly with plants, right? There's, as you can see here, there's over 200 species of plants that were used for something, right? Food, medicine, teas, right? Who here likes tea? Yeah, tea's nice, especially on a cold, rainy day, right? I drank a lot of tea this weekend. But indigenous people would make teas out of plants as well, right? So again, lots of different things are used. Yeah, in terms of technology, again, we saw lots of technology. Arya, you got to have your mask up, sorry. Lots of different technologies, right? So lots of different tools, and again, I'm sure we saw lots of technology at the museum. Here we see different ways of fishing, right? Either for regular fish or for even whales, right? There's a cool fish spear. This is a fish, oh, it rhymes, a fish weir, right? So a dam that keeps the fish from passing through, so you can go and stab them with your spear and catch them. Although that bear is kind of looking at it like, what is this thing? Why is it in my river?
Maybe he's using that tree. He's using to hunting the fishes from that tree.
It could be.
They put this to catch the big fish. I
Bi-
think they make this wood to like catching the fishes, because at last session you like this. You show a picture that like something like that they put it in the beach to take fishing, and I think they're come here to take a fish and eat it.
Yeah. So you can build these in a couple of different ways, right? So you can build it across a river here and sort of space those pieces so that smaller fish can go through, but bigger fish can't, and so as they try to get through, you can stick them with the spear, right? You can also kind of build it across the river to kind of funnel the fish into one place. Yeah, you can funnel the fish into one place, and then you can spear them very easily too, right? So there's a few different ways that they do it depending on the type of river and how the fish are moving. But yeah, these fish would have been, caught, cleaned up, right? Take the guts out of them, maybe take the skin off them, dry them in the sun just like this, and store them away, right? Same thing, here's the collection of some other fish hung out to dry, thousands and thousands of them, and then you can use them in the winter, right? Lots of different technologies to do with weaving baskets, and so, or just with weaving in general. So you probably saw things that looked like this at the museum, more or less, right? Lots of baskets, incredibly well woven, right? Like, not only are they kind of well constructed and durable and beautiful, some of them have interesting designs on them, right? That kind of geometric designs. And again, some of them are woven so well that they're actually waterproof. Like, they will hold water, which is unbelievable, right? But yeah, like a lot of skill, right? A lot of knowledge goes into doing this kind of thing. It's also true that indigenous people in this part of the world, although they didn't farm, they kind of helped nature along a little bit, right? So if they were, if they were digging for clams, let's say, in a clam bed, they're digging for clams, but they knew that, down the beach there's no clams. What they might do is take a bunch of clams and plant them in the other clam bed so that they'll reproduce, and then they'll have 2 clam beds, not just one, right? Same thing with the river, right? If there was a river with not a lot of fish in it, they might transport fish over from one river to the other and try to stock that river with fish and try to get fish to breed in it. So, they weren't, again, it's a stretch to say that they were farming, right? They weren't farming or domesticating animals, but they were kind of helping nature along, right? In some cases, they would burn down part of the forest, right? If you burn the forest, it regenerates the forest floor, new plants start to grow, new trees. Animals will be attracted to all of this new growth. They can hunt the animals. So they would kind of manage the environment that way as well. So again, they're not farming, they're not domesticating animals, but they're kind of helping Mother Nature along a little bit because they know how their world works, right? They know how to kind of help it produce as much food as it can. Right? Yeah. The other thing they use here is sustainable harvesting, right? So indigenous people are very careful not to use all of everything all the time, right? So if there's not a lot of deer around, they stop hunting deer, right? They don't keep hunting them until they're extinct, right? That would be stupid, right? Because then there's no more deer to eat. So if there's something that there's not a lot of, they focus on other things, right? To let the populations regrow. Here they often took wooden planks and bark from trees, but they did it in such a way that the trees would stay alive, right? They didn't just cut down every tree that they needed. They just kind of took what was needed, but tried to keep everything surviving, right? Yeah, so they were transplanting plants, they were transplanting salmon eggs, clams, again, just kind of helping the environment along wherever they could, instead of just hunting and cutting everything down, which is kind of how Europeans do things, right? This is probably a little bit too much detail here. Food, I'm going to just skip over it. Food was cooked various ways, sometimes in boiled water, sometimes over the fire, sometimes with an earth oven, which is pretty cool. You take a bunch of food, you bury it in the ground, and then you build a giant fire over top. You let the fire burn for a while, and then once the fire burns down, you dig up all the food and it's nicely roasted. Yeah, it's just like roasting things in the oven where everything gets kind of soft and tender. You can do it just by burying it in the ground and then building a fire over top. Yeah, so lots of fire to cook foods. Another important resource here is the cedar tree. And we saw some cedar trees outside the museum, the really, really big ones. Yeah, those are all cedars. And cedar is a very useful wood for this part of the world. The trees are huge, right? They're quite plentiful. The wood holds up very well in wet weather, like we have right now. And the indigenous people in this area used it for all kinds of things, right? So they wove baskets out of it, like we saw.
They are light.
What's that?
The cedars are light. I
This-
mean their weights.
Say that again?
Their weights are light. Are they heavy or not?
Their weights? Of what?
Of that trees.
Like how heavy is the wood? I would say it's reasonably light. As woods go, as different woods go, cedar is a pretty light wood in terms of weight. Is that what you're asking? Yeah. So some woods are really, really heavy. Cedar's a pretty lightweight wood.
Because they are very good. If they are light, if their weights are high, it is impossible to bring them or just to keep them in another way.
Yeah, sometimes. Yeah, sometimes. Yeah, so that's a cedar tree. There's lots of them around here, tons of them. And so yeah, this is a hat made of cedar bark. And again, you may have seen similar ones at the museum on Friday. Man, that must be difficult to make though, hey? To take the bark from a cedar tree and pull strings off it and then weave it into something like that. Unbelievable, right? Unbelievable. One of the other things, cedar gets used for weaving, for hats, for clothing. It gets used for those big houses that we saw, all made of cedar, but also for canoes, right? So we saw a number of boats, and serving vessels as well, made out of hollowing out a whole log of cedar, right? So things that kind of looked like this, right? So here's an indigenous canoe here in Vancouver in 1890. So it looks like, I'm looking at this, and it looks like it was probably taken near Stanley Park. So if you guys have you ever walked around Stanley Park? Yeah? So if you go like from the parking lot, and it's before the lighthouse, right? So you're looking at kind of North Vancouver across the water there. That's probably where that is. And here you can see 130 years ago, some indigenous people with their canoe, right? And we can see, here's some historical artwork of indigenous people rowing their canoes. Here's kind of a more modern version with the very highly decorated canoe and highly decorated paddles. But again, all of it made out of cedar wood, right? Lots of textiles as well, right? And so you may have seen something like this at the museum as well. And so these indigenous people are excellent weavers, right? Sometimes weaving with plant fibers or cedar fibers, sometimes with animal fur or mountain goat fur. They knew how to kind of weave these into very complicated patterns. And that's just unreal, right? The amount of skill and detail that goes into making something like that. Wow, right? These are people with no modern technology, no machines, no nothing, right? But they know how to make these things just from natural materials and with their own skill in their own hands. Right? So again, hunting and gathering or foraging, it's not a complicated way of life in terms of, it's not a hard way of life in terms of work, but it is a very skill-based way of life. You really need to know what you're doing. And as you can see, these people really know what they're doing, right? Not only can they survive and thrive, but they can survive and create amazing works of art from natural materials, right? Incredible. In terms of social organization here, if you look across Canada, you'll see that Indigenous groups have different types of social organization depending on what their culture is like, right? So there are simple foragers in Canada, or there were simple foragers in Canada that had more equal social organizations. But here on the West Coast, we had some social hierarchies, right? Not like we saw in Egypt or Mesopotamia for sure, but differences in status, right? So we have chiefs, right? Leaders of houses or leaders of clans. They're usually inherited, right? So you're the chief because your father was the chief and his father was the chief. And, you know, certain families or certain chiefs controlled access to certain resources, right? Or certain parts of the landscape. And so nobody's really, you know, there's no king or anything like that, but there are chiefs that need to kind of talk to each other and kind of collaborate and cooperate. So a little bit of a social hierarchy, not like we saw in any of those ancient civilizations, but a little bit, right? Some people are a little bit more, have more power and more status than others. Yeah. Let's see. Oh yeah. Often Indigenous groups are organized by clans here. And so a clan is kind of, the best way to describe a clan in an anthropological sense is like my last name, okay? So my last name is Metcalf, right? So I inherited that name from my father, right? He inherited it from his father. We are connected to all the other people with that name, right? Because you don't just pick your last name out of a hat, right? You inherit it. So in theory, I am related to all the other Metcalfs around, right? If you can only get the name through inheritance, I'm probably related to them somehow, way, way, way back, right? And so if we went way back in time, probably 500 or 600 years, we'd probably find the first person with that last name, right? Somewhere in the UK, right? Somewhere in Britain was the first person with the last name Metcalf. I don't know who that person is. No idea. I don't know how I'm related to any of the other Metcalfs that are out there. I assume I am, but I have no idea how. But in a way, we're kind of connected, right? We share this name, and in theory, if you went back far enough in our family trees, you would find the first person with that last name. And that's kind of what a clan is. People who are, you know, assumed to be related to each other, but they don't really know how, right? You know how you're related to your aunts and uncles and grandparents, but I don't really know how I'm related to all those other Metcalfs. But I must be in some way, right? That's the only way to get this name, is you inherit it. Clans are the same way. Clans are groups of people who feel that they are descended from a common ancestor, okay? Now, in Indigenous people here on the coast, rather than last names, they have clans that are based on animals. So the wolf, the clan of the wolf, the clan of the eagle, the clan of the killer whale, right? The clan of the bear. And so these people believe that these animals are actually their ancestor, right? Their kind of mythological ancestor. which, when you think about it, they're kind of right? Because if you look at our DNA and you compare it to that of an eagle or a wolf or a killer whale or a bear, we actually have DNA in common with all of those animals. We actually share some of the same DNA.
With eagle?
Yeah.
What is it related to each other?
What's an eagle? Like a bird?
No, I know.
Oh, okay.
What's related with our humans?
Well, we do share, because we're all organisms that exist on Earth, we actually do share some DNA. Not a huge amount, right? So we are 98% similar to chimpanzees and bonobos, right? We're probably only like 40% similar to eagles. I don't know what the exact number is, but we actually share DNA with these animals. And so in a way, they're right? Indigenous people are right. We are related to the killer whale, the bear, the eagle, the wolf, right? We are kind of related to these animals in a way. But they kind of see them as an ancestor from which they're descended, right? And so this kind of helps to organize society as well, right? Different clans, different groups that are responsible for different things, okay? Yeah, still too much. Oh, but I did want to show you this. Pretty much all cultures around the world engage in some form of body modification, okay? So humans around the world modify their bodies in different ways, right? So how many people have their ears pierced? Ears pierced? You've modified your body, Felicia, right? Any nose piercings in here? I don't think so, right? No nose piercings, ear piercings, tattoos? Anybody? Tattoos are body modification, right? You're drawing things on your body permanently, right? And there's all sorts of other ways to do it too. Piercings, tattoos, ritual scarring, filing of teeth, removal of teeth, binding of feet, right? In, I think, ancient China, feet were bound. But here, some indigenous people, not anymore, but hundreds of years ago, they would actually bind the heads of their infants. And so you'll probably know, if you've ever been around a very young baby, that their skulls are quite soft, right? You got to be careful with their heads, because the bones in their skull are still kind of growing and joining themselves together. So you have to be really careful. They've got kind of soft heads. But what indigenous people used to do is kind of wrap cloth around their baby's head, not super tight, right? Just a little snug, right? And you kind of keep it there. And what happens is that the skull will actually grow according to that binding. It doesn't hurt the child. It doesn't do anything to their brain. The brain just grows to fill the space that it has. But it results in kind of a bit of a cone shape to the head, right? And a forehead that's kind of a little bit flattened here. And so you can see in this artwork, that's kind of an extreme example there, but the woman has kind of a point to her head, right? And you can see from this photo here, this guy has the same thing, right? He has a little bit of a head that's kind of pointy, right?
What
And
if their brain cannot grow like their bones?
yeah, no, it does. It does. The brain will grow to kind of fill that space. So it doesn't do anything to the brain works just fine. It doesn't hurt anybody. It just looks very, to our eyes anyway, it looks very odd, right?
If the brain have the free space, it can grow.
Yeah, well, to a limit. To a limit, but yeah, if the brain sort of shapes itself a little differently, it's not a big deal, right? Most people's heads are, because all of our heads are a little different, are they not? Yeah, they're all kind of slightly different shapes and sizes, right? So the brain kind of grows to fill the space, and you can kind of you know, you can change the shape of it a little bit and it's not a big deal. And here, yeah, people practiced cranial, what's the term? Cranial deformation, or there's another word for it, I can't remember what it is. But they did this on the northwest coast. And so if you went back here hundreds of years ago, you might see people with kind of pointy cone-shaped heads, right? And of course we would look at these people and think, wow, that's weird, look at those pointy head people. And they would look at us and say, yikes, look at these round heads, you know, how ugly. Because this was a very beautiful look, they thought. And so if you went down the northwest coast here, you would see that some people practiced this. They did shape their skulls. Some people did not. And of course, the pointy-headed people thought all the round-headed people looked ugly. And all the round-headed people thought the pointy-headed people looked ugly. And, you know, it's a cultural difference, right? But yeah, this was something that they did. Again, doesn't hurt anybody. I wouldn't recommend you doing it though, but because it's permanent. But yeah, no, it doesn't hurt. All these people are fine, but you can, you know, shape the skull, right? And so this is just one way in which human cultures have kind of modified their physical body over thousands of years, right? And again, piercings, tattoos, scarification, cranial deformation, all these things are just ways in which people have kind of modified their body for beauty, right? For ideas of beauty. All right, what time have we got? Okay, good. Yeah, I just wanted to go over our trip to the Museum of Anthropology because of course we went on Friday. That's actually the outside of that great hall that was under construction, so it's too bad we couldn't see it, but maybe did anyone see when they were going to be done construction? Did anyone read that? I missed it too. Feels like it's been forever, but COVID's probably slowed things down. But yeah, so I asked you 4 questions based on our museum trip, and I just wanted to go over a couple of them today. One is the first question I asked you is connections between the culture and the environment, right? And of course, there's lots and lots of things that you could suggest for this. Basically, because everything that Indigenous people use or used hundreds of years ago came from the environment, right? You couldn't go to Walmart, right? You couldn't shop on Amazon. Everything came from, what a world, right? You couldn't, you know, if you needed something, you had to create it from the environment, right? So everything these people created was in fact connected to the environment, right? And so lots of people sent me pictures of wood, right? Whether it was wooden sculptures or house posts or totem poles or those big serving dishes with those giant shovel-like spoons, right? People sent me that. That was great. These spindle whorls here that are used for weaving wool into cool sweaters like that. It looks cozy, actually. Yeah, all of those things work really well. Yeah, all of those pieces made out of wood, right? Big cedar trees, great for carving. And cedar's a nice soft wood too, right? So it's easy to carve. You don't have to like hammer away at it, right? It's very soft. The third one I asked you here is, this is the first sentence is a principle of learning for Indigenous cultures, right? So we talked about in this class the process of enculturation, right? We enculturate the next generation, we teach them culture, and every society has kind of ideas about how that should be done, right? And so this here is a principle of learning from Indigenous cultures, right? The idea that learning is a holistic thing, it's reflexive, it's reflective, It's experiential, it's relational, so it's focused on connectedness and relationship, and a sense of place, right? So, to connect with this kind of experience and idea of place, I asked you, why was it important to come to a place like this? Right? And some people told me that, it's a different kind of feeling that you get from a place like this, right? There's a different atmosphere. And so you can look at these things online. I can put pictures of things on the screen here and we can watch that. But it's different. It's a different process than actually, or it's a different experience than actually being there, right? And sort of, not being immersed in the culture, but being surrounded by it, right? And it's a very different experience, right? And I kind of invite you to think about the ways in which place matters, right? If any of you are religious, right, or if you've ever been to a church or a temple or a mosque or something like that, you probably know that when you enter into one of these places, the energy is different, right? There's something, it's not just a building, right? There's something going on, right? It feels different, right? It feels special. It feels like there's something more happening there. And I think, maybe some of you felt this or maybe none of you did. But I feel that museums are kind of like that, right? They're not religious, but there's a place where there's this different kind of energy, right? Where you're surrounded with things from a particular culture or from a particular time, and you're not really in the place that you are. You're sort of transported somewhere else, right? And I think that's true of religious buildings, right? You're not just in a building. For instance, you're in the house of God, right? This isn't just four walls and a roof. This is the house of God, right? And it feels different because of it. And here, this isn't the house of God, but this is kind of a place in which, this culture kind of breathes and is alive, right? Or the historical part of this culture is alive. And so, yeah, it's not really the same feeling as, being there is important, right? Being there is a different experience than simply looking at it on your phone, right? It's a totally different thing. Some people said, it's interesting to see all this stuff. And it's impressive, right? Seeing these things in person, being able to see the detail, in some cases being able to see the size of some of these objects, it's amazing, right? And to be able to see that, I think, in person is really important. Some people said some other things here too. It's more interesting. This one's important too, right? Is that going to this museum is a demonstration, or it's an expression of respect, right? So, we haven't really had a chance to talk about it too much in this class, although we've talked about it in other classes, and you've probably heard about it in other classes. Indigenous people have been through a lot in Canada in the last few hundred years, and they're trying to rebuild their culture, reclaim their languages. And so, going to these places is, in some ways, a gesture of respect, right? We are going there to learn about their people and their ideas and their beliefs, right? And so that's kind of important in a country where, Indigenous people have been so poorly treated, and that some argue that they've been the victims of genocide in Canada. And that's a big, heavy word, right? But some people argue that that's in fact what has happened here. And so for us to go to the museum is a gesture of respect, right? We want to know who your people are, right? We want to know what you believe and where you come from and who you were, so we can better understand who you are, right? I think that's a valid thing to say, right? That's an important thing to say. Yeah, and it recognizes them, right? That visit and that respect recognizes them as who they are, right? The first peoples of Canada, the people whose land that this was before all of us came here, right? Yeah, so we've got a few other answers here. Let's see. Yeah, so the idea of, trying to make connections with our own culture, right? How did people in the past do the kinds of things that we are, that we do, right? How did they look at the same things that we look at and see them differently? Right? That's a useful exercise to do. Yeah, and it kind of, again, the last one here is about respect. It's about remembrance. It's about recognizing these cultures for who they are, right? An important part of Canada, even though they were sort of pushed aside for a long time, they're an important part of who we are, right? And the visit to the museum, I think, helps to, to reaffirm that, right? To confirm it. Yeah. Yeah, good stuff. Now the last question is, again, another principle of Indigenous learning is that learning recognizes the role of Indigenous knowledge. And so I said it before today, and I've said it a number of times before, that this way of life is not so much hard work, but it is highly skilled. It is a highly skilled way to live your life, right? I don't think any of us could walk into the mountains on the North Shore and be just fine, right? We'd probably all die because we don't know how to make any shelter. We don't know how to find food. We don't know how to make any tools or clothing or anything out of the natural environment. We'd all be finished in a few days, right? But these people successfully lived in this area for thousands and thousands of years. And again, they did so because of their knowledge, right? Because of their skills, because of how well they knew their environment and all of the techniques they knew to create technology and shelter and to gather and hunt for food, right? So they had a lot of knowledge and a lot of skill. But what do you think? What are some of the things that we can learn from Indigenous cultures? Okay. Right, but I'm kind of more thinking about what can we take from their culture for our own life, for our own experience. What can they kind of offer us in terms of things that we can learn for ourselves?
If you want to gain products from the nature, you have to take care of the nature. If you want to get benefits from the environment, you have to always be careful from your using the products. For example, if you are wasting something, some means that it comes from, for example, deer, and it's in danger, it will be finished for a few years later.
Yeah, that's a really good point, right? Indigenous people cared for the environment, right? Because they knew that it looked after them, right? So many indigenous people think of the land or the earth as kind of like their mother, right? Something that they're connected to, that they're a part of, but it also takes care of them. But in order for your mother to take care of you, you have to respect her, right? You have to look after her. And so indigenous people really saw that as a relationship, right? As, yes, we take the things that we need from the land, right? We hunt the animals that we hunt, and we fish and we gather, but we also care for the environment and we respect it as well, right? Because it takes care of us, right? And so we must take care of it, right? It's a relationship, right? It's a give and take. But that's not really how we think about the earth in the modern world, right? Think about, I don't know if you are familiar with the Bible, but if you go to the first book, one of the first books of the Bible, Genesis, in Genesis there's a creation story, right? God creates the light and the darkness and the heavens and the earth and the animals, and he puts all the animals on earth, and then he creates humans, and then on the seventh day he rests, because it's a lot of work doing all that creating, right? So that's the creation story. But in the creation story, it says that, and God created man, and he gave man dominion over all the animals of the earth, and to use as he saw fit, right? So right there, you can see a big difference, right? In the Bible, God gives the earth and the animals to humans to use however they want, right? They're things to use. But here in indigenous culture, you are in relationship with the land and with the animals that are around you, right? It's a give and take, right? You don't own the land or the animals, right? The animals are not given to you to do with whatever you want. You are in relationship with them, right? And you have to care for them so that they'll care for you, right? You don't own them. They're not yours. They're not possessions, right? The land is not your possession. Animals are not your possession. You are a part of a system, right? You are in relationship. Totally different ways of thinking about the earth, right? And so, yeah, as Arian mentions, this might be useful for us as we continue to, not respect our mother or take care of our mother, but in fact destroy her, right? And take everything we can from her for our own comfort and enjoyment, right? And that's something that might be worth learning here, right? From indigenous culture, that, the earth takes care of us, but we also must take care of it, right? What else might we learn?
Can you see?
Yeah.
I learned that one of the indigenous about the people that they do like group work, and they say their knowledge, I think, and like what can I say? It's like they conversation with each other, and do something. We can know it from the from the things that in museum, that it's made by group, not by one, not by like a man. It say that like by Haida group, something like that. And I think you can learn a group teammate work.
Yeah.
Because now we are do everything like in solo, but yeah, indeed. And another thing that the ideas are same, because we know that shaping on the trees, the
Yeah.
body of the trees, the ideas are same, but they are in separate groups, and it's amazing.
Yeah, and that's very true, right? Is that, we all come from different cultures here. Some of us come from cultures that are more individualistic. Some come from cultures that are more kind of collectively minded. But here, indigenous cultures are collectively minded, right? So their cooperation and sharing is really the most important thing, right? The way that you survive in an environment like this, hundreds or thousands of years ago, is by cooperating and by sharing, right? And again, sharing is not really something we're encouraged to do so much, right? Maybe a little bit, right? Maybe you give to charity, or maybe you share food with someone if you have a little extra. But we kind of operate by how much you have, right? You have to go out there and get things for yourself, right? People aren't just going to give you money and all the things you want. You have to go out there and work for them, right? You have to acquire them on your own, because nobody's going to just hand them to you, right? And again, that's a very individualistic kind of way of thinking, right? Indigenous people would say, we all share, right? We all share with each other all the time. And you have, you may take from other people when you need, right? But you also have an obligation to give everything you can to share with others, right? And again, that's how you survive, right? When everybody goes out to hunt and to look for food, not everybody is successful all the time, right? But if everybody always shares with everyone else, it means that everyone eats all the time, rather than, yes, I ate 2 days last week and then I starved the other days because I couldn't find anything. If everyone shares with everyone all the time, everyone always eats, right? But again, we have a very different, modern society is much more individualistic and much less about sharing and support, right? And that's a very strange notion for a traditional indigenous worldview, right? Where sharing is the most important thing. What else might we learn? Those are really good. What else might we learn? Yeah.
And like if that's for the first conclusion that they should respect it and try respect and take care of it, because it's like a gift from the creator for them to survive in this world.
Yeah. So that's interesting too, right? Is that it is the land and the earth is a gift from the creator, right? And so as a gift from someone, to show respect to that person, you should take care of the gift, right? If somebody gives you, oh gosh, I don't know, let's say they give you a really nice sweater, okay? Somebody gives you a really nice sweater, and then the next time that they come over to your house, they see the sweater they gave you, and it's kind of lying on the floor because you spilled your Coke all over the table, and so you wiped up the Coca-Cola with their sweater, and then you threw it on the floor, and then you spilled some Doritos on it, and whoops, and you stepped on it too, right? Doesn't really show a lot of respect for the gift, right? You treated their gift like garbage, right? And so again, that's an important thing too, right? Is that thinking of existence and creation as a gift that you're given means that you kind of have an obligation to take care of it, right? It doesn't show any respect for the person who gave it to you when you don't honor the gift, right? When you don't look after the gift. If you treat it like crap, it shows no respect for the person who gave it to you, right? So again, the thinking of creation as a gift, also a very important thing. And maybe something that some of our cultures kind of practice, or maybe not, I'm not sure, right? Maybe gifts are something that we think we can just do whatever it's ours now, we can do whatever we want with it, right? But here there's an obligation to care for the gift. What else?
About the meals, you can see they were all they were eating healthy food.
Uh-huh.
But nowadays, because we don't have enough time to make healthy foods,
Uh-huh.
we prefer to eat fast food. Is
Yeah.
it because I think those people can live more than us?
Yeah, so our diets are kind of very unnatural in a way, right? So indigenous people only ate natural foods, right? They hunted, they fished, they gathered things from the natural world, and that's what they ate, right? Because that's what was available. But nowadays, again, we eat things like Coca-Cola, which is not a natural thing, right? We eat lots of Doritos and things like that, and those aren't natural either, right? We eat lots of things that are, you know, highly processed, some of which aren't even food, right? Some of that whipped cream stuff, it's an edible petroleum product, right? It's not even food. You can eat it and not die, but it's not food, right? And so, yeah, we kind of, they had a very healthy diet, lots of nutrients, and we're probably very healthy as a result, right? But here in the modern world, we eat a lot of stuff that is not natural, right? That's highly processed, has a lot of additives that, indigenous people would never have had. And yeah, maybe we're not as healthy because of it. Yeah, that's a good one. Gosh, anything else? Say what? I can't hear you.
They believe in like spiritual beings.
Okay.
They respect that, and and then they also respect their ancestors.
Right. So. So they believe in and have connections to the ancestors, but also to spirits, right? And we'll talk about this shortly, but for indigenous people, everything has a spirit, right? So every tree, every animal, every rock, right? Everything has a spirit in it. And so think about that in terms of respect and how you interact with things. How would you interact with things if you knew that there was a spirit in them, right? Is that tree outside, is it just a resource, right? Is it just a thing to cut down so we can make something out of it? Or is it a living being with a spirit, right? When things have spirits, you have to interact with them differently, right? They're not just things anymore, right? They are persons, right? Spirits, things with energy, and you have to interact with them differently, right? They're not just inanimate objects, right? It's interesting how, again, some of these beliefs are very much, I think, at odds with the modern world, but if you believe them, it really changes how you interact with the world and the environment, right? If you believe that creation is a gift, right? If you believe in an obligation to take care of the earth because it takes care of us, right? If you believe that things have spirits, right? If a tree or a rock has a spirit and it's not just a thing, it changes how you interact with it, right? Okay, good people. Let's take a break. I see Felicia's about to pass out over there. So let's take a quick break. When we come back, we'll talk a little bit about the power of story again, and we'll hear a First Nation story for ourselves, okay? But let's take a break first. All right. So to sort of continue, I guess, in this line of what can we learn from Indigenous knowledge and Indigenous people, I want to talk about, well, actually, I don't want to talk about that. I want to talk about myths and spirits and shamans, okay? So we haven't really talked about too much about Indigenous spirituality and how they kind of view the supernatural world, but I do want to talk about that today, okay? So I have a short reading for you in Microsoft Teams. Again, it's called Myths, Spirits, and Shamans. And I have a few questions for you to answer from that reading, okay? So I'm going to give you, let's see, I'm going to give you about 15 minutes.
There is no question.
There's no questions?
9 questions.
There's 9 questions.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so I'm going to give you about 15 minutes and then I'll see where you are, okay? So I'll put some time on the clock. Is that okay, Felicia?
So it's come from which pages?
It is, the article is in Microsoft Teams and it's under Files and it's in the folder called Readings
Okay.
and you'll see it there, Myths, Spirits, and
Yeah,
Shamans. Okay. Yeah, so give it a read. There's some interesting things in there, and then we'll talk about it in a bit. There are a lot of questions, but they're kind of easy ones, I think.
Yes, I'm trying to comment.
Okay.
Maybe we should take time.
Yes.
Take time to what?
Connect first.
I can put it up on the screen for you if you want.
I'm still not connected.
You're still not connected. Okay. Well, let's try that. Hang on. Hang on.
Sir, how can you have internet?
You're CC staff?
Am I C? I probably am CC staff. Yeah, I'm CC staff.
Can you share?
Ah, ha, ha.
Can you share?
I'm CC staff. I still have internet. You don't.
You have sir, you know, you can search in internet and it's okay, but somewhere it's don't work, like video call and now in Teams.
You know, if you try logging into the computer underneath you there, those ones are hardwired, so those might work. Want to try that? Try the computer in your desk.
Where is it?
Where's what?
Is it on Readings?
Yes.
Sir, can you pause the time?
Can I what?
Pause the time.
Yes.
Yeah, I'll reset it. Did you find it?
Yes.
Do they? Pretty sure they're hardwired connected. All right. Yeah.
Did you read front page?
It's a separate thing in Microsoft Teams. So it's in under Readings, under Files, and it's called Myths and Spirits and Shamans.
The internet works.
Yeah?
Yeah.
We're back? What did we do? What did we do before the internet, hey? How did life even work? Yes. Okay, people, so whoops, wrong thing. Okay. Don't have a ton of time here, but let's talk about maybe just a couple of these things, or maybe at least one. So, what's the purpose of myth in First Nations culture?
Myths of the First Nation of British Columbia. At first, it's like a natural and beautiful natural places.
Sure.
And then might also explain the origin of people, differences from the separate group of people. And another thing,
Okay, so what? So number one, sort of where people come from, right? Why are there people here? Why are the people, over the hill? Why are those people different from the way we are? Myths help to describe those differences, right? What else?
and might associate with the art that like shaping in the like in the trees or something like the stone or something like that.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure. We see myth represented in art.
Yeah.
What else? What else is myth for?
Social organizations, as status is often tied to the close relationship between an individual and a mythological figure.
I heard parts of that.
Yeah, like connected with social organization.
Okay, so myth is connected to social organization, right? So
Provide
we
education.
yeah, so we said that in cultures here on the Northwest Coast there is social hierarchy, right? Some families have more status and more power than others. Why is that? Well, myth can help to explain why that is, right? Sorry, what else, Arya?
And the myth provide education and entertainment.
Sure. Myths can be entertaining, right? And usually mythical stories are sometimes exciting and funny and strange. but also they provide education. What do they educate us about?
Performance. After.
Say again?
They provide educations about art.
Okay. Yeah. What else do they tell us? What do myths
Maybe
tell us?
something about the spirits or no?
Something about?
The spirits.
I don't think so. Well, myths, of course, tell us why the world is the way it is, right? Where do those mountains come from? Why is there a river here, right? Who are all these animals, and where do they come from, and why are they all so strange, right? Myths help us to explain what the world is like and how it came to be, how certain families have more power than others. Why are we here, right? Why are we the people that we are, right?
Here's the answer of second question.
Hang on one second, what?
It's like how we were created not to answer questions that we don't know itself.
Sure, they help us answer questions that we don't know the answers to, right? And what else? What's maybe the last thing? Not the last thing, but one other important function of myth.
The origin of people.
Yeah, the origin of people. Yeah, we mentioned that.
Difference between African groups.
Yeah, maybe the other one is, of course, what is correct behavior, right? How should we behave? Myths often tell us a lesson about what's good and bad and right and wrong, and how should we behave and how should we not behave, right? Those things often show up in myth as well, right? What were you asking about number 2 there, Arya?
No, I'm not asking. You say something about like what is the mountain come from.
Oh.
I think it's the answer of second question. If I'm not mistaken.
Oh yeah, definitely related to it, right? Well, why don't you, okay, hang on, pause on that. So we only have a minute or 2 left. So tomorrow, what I would like to do is spend some time working on our final project. I'm not entirely sure, maybe we'll pick this up tomorrow and work on it for a little bit, and then we'll spend the rest of the time on project stuff. Maybe we'll do the entire time on project stuff, I'm not sure yet, but there will be at least a good chunk of time that you can work on your project tomorrow, okay? So be ready for that, be prepared. Other than that, I'll let you go because we're out of time, but I'll see you tomorrow, okay? All right, that is it.